I grew up in a situation where my siblings were experimenting with drugs and alcohol. And I'm the youngest of a family of five by 8.5 years. So, growing up in San Antonio, Texas, with drugs and alcohol, I was born in 1969. So by the time, I'm 8 to 9 years old, my siblings are already experiencing from high school and on. And I didn't feel forced, but I just felt like the natural thing to do was participate in those things, right? So I was introduced to marijuana at 9. My first line of cocaine was done at 12, right? I lost my virginity at 12. Like, there was a lot of things that were happening in my life. And what I realized is that 8.5 year gap was enough time for me to look and realize, as my brothers were going to jail or being in rehab or, pawning things and looking for money and doing simple, interesting things in life and not making good choices. I look back and said, wow, like, this is an opportunity where I see through academics and athletics and the people in this world, they were creating a different opportunity than what my brothers would experience. Without that shaping of what educators showed me what life could be like, without that, I'd have to imagine that I would just be somewhere in the same realm that they were at, whether I'd still be alive or dead. But I just think that I'd be in the drug business in some form or fashion, whether I was either selling, participating, or just recreational. I probably would have been a statistic, much like my siblings. Unfortunately, all three of my brothers have passed due to drug-related deaths. I think Debbie Bagby was an elementary teacher that was just, for me, one of those teachers that made me feel valued, seen, and heard more than any other teacher. And I remember going to help first and second graders, and I remember asking her, so is this what it's like to be a teacher? Because, like, there is this sense of accomplishment when you help somebody. And I remember her saying, yeah. And I thought to myself, that was the first time I say that the teaching bug was planted. Unfortunately, at one point in my educational career, I wanted to get out, like most educators do at one point. But I had lost my why. I felt like every day my why was driven by external factors that had no impact on my job. Accountability for schools, the testing system, the exclusionary system, like, the system in itself is so archaic that it sets us up to fail. It's just, I think that most of us get into education thinking it's going to be something completely different, right? And then you get into it and you're like, wow, like, so this is what education's really about. And I kept thinking to myself, like, I didn't know I never got into education to fail. I would never have gotten in it, right? Collectively on our campus, we led the district with 1,149 types of suspension at Ed White Middle School. We were the number one exclusionary campus out of all Northeast Independent School District in San Antonio. But that concept of saying, let's get rid of the kids that don't want to be here, well, that means we excluded more kids than anyone else, but our discipline continued to increase. So we were literally living out the definition of insanity, expecting a different result by doing the same thing over and over. And the only way that we were allowed to get outside the box was to adopt a restorative mindset. And then when we became the first campus to adopt an entire campus approach in implementing this. And so we did it just in 6th grade, then 7th grade, 8th grade. I looped up with my kids for 3 years. It was those 3 years of experiences of going, wait a minute, there's an alternative of holding conversations and accountability in a way where students started saying, like, I think I may have gotten that. I think I may have mistreated that person. I think I may have, like, really didn't think about my choices when I was doing that. So I remember the second year that I went home one weekend and I thought to myself, I said, man, like, I don't like the way that I am being with my students. Like, I personally recognize the difference in my personality and my interactions from being really relational to non-relational. And I think sometimes we don't tell kids when we're thinking about them. And I think as educators, we think about our kids all the time. And I just remember telling the kids, like, hey, I thought about y'all this weekend, and I thought about how I've been treating you, but I've also been thinking about how you're treating me. I hope that you can start to, like, forgive me and we can start to rebuild that relationship. And out of the middle of nowhere, one of my favorite students of all, LaJoy, stood up, and LaJoy said, do you see how we're treating him? And it was just like, wow. She said, we need to do better, right? Look at him. He's owning his part. What about ours? And it was just interesting because that was third period. And that's why I know when we came to lunch, we had a microphone. And I remember LaJoy coming in front of everybody at lunch and saying, Mr. Curtis, can I have the microphone? And I was like, sure, trusting it's LaJoy. And she was like, all right, I don't know if Mr. Curtis is coming to your math class today, but he's going to be coming today and we need to do better. So she starts lecturing the entire cafeteria on how we need to treat each other better, but particularly treat me, right? And that I was willing to do my part. But this is what made this special. How did we get to a point where a young lady in 7th grade is grabbing a microphone, talking to the entire 7th grade class in a cafeteria about how we're treating each other, right? That would never happen. In all my other schools, that would never happen, right? But it started with an adult modeling, coming to their class and saying, I think I'm jacking up our relationships. And I don't think I'm okay with that. What we were doing in a school system, it wasn't the school, it wasn't the system, it wasn't the four walls, it wasn't a job anymore. If we're gonna be in relationships, then it's gotta matter. And for me, it wasn't the work, it wasn't the money, it wasn't the career. It was like these kids mattered. And I think there's no way that you can ever be all in on a kid unless you get a chance to know them. And the way that our schools are set up, we don't have school leaders that are saying, we got to connect with kids, right? We got to build relationships. We're saying, hey, and I was very guilty of this as a principal. We're saying, hey, we got to make sure our scores are up. We got to make sure that the state assessment test that we do well. We got to make sure that we have our high ranking. We got to make sure that we send this many kids to college. We're so result oriented. If we were just relationship oriented, right? There's a quote we use. James Comer says this: no significant learning occurs without a significant relationship. I always say, if the states want significant scores, we're going to need significant learning. In order for us to have significant learning with today's modern day student, we're going to need significant relationships. And until that changes in our structures and in our schools and in our systems, we're going to continue to fail kids.